And in this video, we take a look at a 1998 interview with Superintendent Ivan Dibley, the lead investigator of the Essex boys' murders. The following newspaper article comes from the 21st of January 1998. Superintendent Ivan Dibley was enjoying breakfast at his Chelmsford home when his telephone rang that snowy morning. He was being offered the chance to take over what would be his last and possibly most complex case, the triple gangland killing of Tate, Tucker and Rolfe. But December 7th, 1995 was Mr. Dibley's day off, and he had promised his daughter he would sort out an electrical problem. He had headed more than 25 murder cases in the previous 5 years and was due to retire following 32 years in the force. Only 2 cases remained unsolved, but 1995 had proved to be a good year, and he had cleared up 10 murders in as many months. Relaxing on a leather sofa at his home just weeks ago, Mr. Dibley explained, "I knew those bodies weren't going anywhere. No murder scene is a pretty sight. During my years in the force, I've had to deal with people being burnt in fires and elderly women with their heads bashed in. But considering these men had been shot at close range with a shotgun, it could have been far, far worse." It didn't take long for police to identify the bodies. The Range Rover was registered to Rolfe, and detectives had in fact questioned him the day before. Steele was in the frame from day one. A friend of Rolfe's revealed the dead men had met him that evening. But police could not prove his finger was on the trigger. With virtually no forensic evidence, the team had to find some other way to catch him. Dibley said, quote, "There wasn't even much on house-to-house inquiries. They took less than a day." As he wondered where to turn next, Dibley developed a theory about the murders. "I suspected Tate was the catalyst, and I proved to be nearly 100% right. I think after being incarcerated for quite a long time, he suddenly came out into the big wide world. Tucker took him under his wing, and soon he was dealing with large amounts of money. I think it began to go wrong, because not only was Tate by nature a violent man, but towards the time of his death, he was becoming increasingly unstable due to drugs. But there was still a long way to go before Steele and Womes would be arrested. And by then another officer, Superintendent Brian Story, would have taken over the case. Dibley said, quote, "Although we had an indicator who it was, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. Some policemen may think they are God, but I don't." Okay, so I'll just cut in here very briefly. Now this article is already in some ways contradicting itself. Now bearing in mind this isn't just written by a journalist, this is an actual interview with Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley. At the start of this piece, it's all very much, oh, we knew who it was straight away. We knew it was Steele. We'd had confirmation via people close to Rolfe that he was going to meet Michael Steele that evening. We absolutely knew it was Michael Steele, but we didn't have the smoking gun. We didn't have the forensic evidence to tie him to this crime. And yet here we are in the last paragraph that I've just read out to you, where Detective Inspector Ivan Dibley actually says, quote, "They had an indicator of who was responsible. They had an idea of who was responsible for these triple murders." Is that the same as being certain, being sure, being absolutely positive that you know who's responsible, but you don't have any forensic evidence to back it up? Or did they really have what he's just said there, an indicator of who may be responsible, an idea of who may be responsible for these crimes? Remember from the book Blogs 19 that according to that book, according to what Detective Inspector Ivan Dibley states in that book, he claims that Donna Jaggers comes forward 36 hours after these murders. 36 hours after these murders, Detective Inspector Ivan Dibley should know who they were going to meet that night. According to Donna Jaggers, who passes that information on to Detective Inspector Ivan Dibley, 36 hours after the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, the man that they were going to meet that evening was Michael Steele. Now the reason I've said that to you is because I think you'll find the next part quite interesting. Let's carry on from where we left off. Ivan Dibley continues. "I knew the people who were close to these characters would have a good idea of what was going on, but no one talked, and that's why a strategy had to be adopted. That strategy included a sting operation using 2 officers posing as IRA members Billy and John. The pair made a series of phone calls to Steele and Tate's ex-girlfriend Sarah Saunders, claiming they'd lent Tate money for a drug deal with Steele and now they wanted it back. They also threatened Steele, perhaps hoping to goad him into admitting the murders. A terrified Sarah went to Basildon police, who played along with the sting and said the calls had been made from a well-known Republican bar in Belfast. They said detectives were monitoring the men responsible, but had lost track of them when the gang travelled to the mainland. The idea appears to have been that Sarah, frightened for her and her young son's safety, would spill the beans on Tate, Tucker and Rolfe. Dibley, justifying the undercover operation, said, "We wanted to flush Steele out. We also wanted to provide evidence which we could put before a court." Dibley admitted Billy and John were an unusual tactic. There was a risk we wouldn't be able to use them in court, but when you have no evidence, you have no choice. The team also checked mobile phone records and discovered that Womes had made a call from Rettendon on the night of the killings. The case was three-quarters complete when Dibley retired. Only 2 weeks before, Steele, Womes, Nichols and others were arrested on May 13th, 1996. Dibley added, quote, "I knew they'd done the murders. I knew they were involved in drugs, and I knew we hadn't enough evidence to convict them. All we needed was a bit of luck. Everything had been put in place, and given a fair wind, it would have the result it deserved." Okay, just cutting again here, is the way that's worded does give the wrong impression. And this is kind of what I feel about this investigation as a whole, really. When it mentions something like, it was discovered that Womes had made a call from Rettendon on the evening of the murders, bearing in mind that Jack Womes put himself in Rettendon. They didn't have information or cell data to put him in Rettendon. Jack Womes put himself in Rettendon on the evening of December the 6th. And I think this is the way it would have been worded by the prosecution in court. It's almost as if we discovered that Jack Womes made a phone call from Rettendon. It was us. We discovered it. It's almost as if it's giving you the impression that it's something that they've found out, something that they've gained knowledge of, rather than Jack Womes actually saying himself, "Yeah, I was in Rettendon that evening." Now, the reason that we know that is because, as I've spoken about in previous videos, telephone technology back in 1995 was nowhere near as advanced as it is today. All that they had in terms of concrete evidence was the fact that Jack Womes could have been anywhere within a 7-mile radius of where the actual mast was, which covered potentially like a 7 to 10-mile radius. Now, you could argue that Jack Womes has been given this information. They've said, look, we know you're in the area. This is the cell site data. It puts you in this area. You could argue that Jack Womes has then at this point in time panicked and said, yeah, look, I was in Rettendon, I was collecting a car. Or it could be that he literally was. That's just an innocent explanation, that he was in fact in Rettendon. It just depends how you want to look at it. But one thing is for sure is that the police didn't have anything concrete to say that Jack Womes himself was in Rettendon, only that he was within X amount of miles from the telephone mast from which his phone connected to. Let's now continue from where we left off. Ivan Dibley continues. It was quite upsetting having to leave the investigation before it was finished. However, it doesn't matter when you retire from the police, it's never convenient. It was Dibley's groundwork that led to the successful conclusion of the case. During his research, Dibley had discovered Nichols was an associate of the killers. It was my view that the peripheral people involved would not want to dirty their hands with a triple murder. They were the weak link. And it was Nichols who eventually provided the vital evidence to nail Steele and Womes. Okay, now cutting here one last time before we conclude this video. It's interesting here that this article is from 1998, and it's mentioned here that Detective Ivan Dibley states that they were looking for the people around, or sort of on the outskirts of this triple murder, the people who may have had a little bit of involvement but weren't the actual gunmen. Now, this isn't anything new regarding how this case was investigated. I'm sure many of you will remember back when we took a look at some of the very earliest newspaper reports, some of which came out around the 8th or 9th of December 1995. Even during that time, Ivan Dibley is telling the press that they're really looking for possibly the getaway driver. he may well be the weak link in solving this case. It could well be that the killer travelled down there in a Range Rover alongside Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, and once that Range Rover reached the locked 5-bar gate, the killer's partner appeared from nearby bushes, clutching 2 shotguns. But they wouldn't have used their own getaway vehicle. There would have been a getaway vehicle parked up nearby, with a third person involved in these murders. This person, the getaway driver, would prove to be the weak link in the case of Michael Steele and Jack Womes. Lo and behold, over a year after Ivan Dibley made these miraculous predictions, this is exactly what transpired in court. We had Michael Steele, Jack Womes, and the supergrass, who was the getaway driver, Darren Nichols.